Hey guys, I am back in the kitchen, but I'm actually not going to be cooking anything. I'm going to be making soap. It's a project that I'm seriously overdue for. I've been making my own soap for a couple years, but I haven't made a batch since I've lived here. Usually I'll make a batch this size and it'll last me a year, but I have actually had to buy soap from the store. Gasp. So, it's a good time of year to do it. I have less going on and I need to just stop procrastinating and get to it. The ingredients for soap are pretty basic. It is oil, water, and lye. And a few tools that I'll be using: some non-reactive, heat-resistant glass containers, an immersion blender, a soap mold, scale to weigh things out, gloves to protect my hands, and glasses to protect my eyes. I'm also making sure to wear long sleeves because when you're working with lye and or a lye solution, so lye and water, it is a very, very strong base, which means that it can give you a chemical burn if it comes into contact with your skin. So that's why the nitrile gloves, that's why the eye protection, and that's why the long sleeves. The very first thing I'm gonna do is to measure out the lye, measure out the water, combine those and set that aside to cool down, because when you pour the lye into the water, it causes a chemical reaction, it heats it up, and you ultimately want all of your ingredients to be relatively the same temperature when you combine it. So I'm gonna get to that and then do a little bit more explaining. The next step is going to be to pour this lye into this water. You never want to pour the water into the lye, you want to pour the lye into the water. That's important because it can sputter, because it is kind of a serious chemical reaction. I always do this outside because it does create fumes. You can technically do it inside if you have a well-ventilated area. So I'm gonna run outside, I'm gonna pour this into this and leave it out there to cool for a little bit. All right. And while that's outside, I can chill with the safety gear for a minute. So let's talk about the next ingredient, which is all the oils. Olive oil is a great soap base. It's not going to make your soap very bubbly. It's not going to make your soap have really strong cleansing abilities, but if you've ever heard of Castile soap, that's basically olive oil soap. You can go up to 100% with your soap and it'll still be good quality soap that you can use. Coconut oil is also a great soap additive. It will make your soap lather a little bit more and it gives your soap stronger cleansing abilities. A couple other oils that I'm using in my soap recipe is this sweet almond oil and some shea butter, just for various qualities. So the next step is to weigh out and start melting any of these oils that are hard at room temperature. Obviously I don't need to melt the olive oil, and this sweet almond oil is liquid at room temperature. This coconut oil will melt really easily, but it does need just a little bit of heat applied to it. So I'm gonna measure these out and get them on the stove. And while I'm waiting for some things to heat up and some things to cool down, let's talk a little bit about what's going on, what makes it soap. Soap can be made from any strong base. I believe historically they used wood ashes and fat. So you can use tallow, you can use olive oil, you can use avocados, you can use all kinds of crazy stuff. The soap recipe that I use, I invented. I did enough research to know what good bases are, you know, what would give different properties, like I was talking about with the coconut oil versus the olive oil, and I plugged it into a soap calculator. I will put that down below. A soap calculator is incredibly important because there's no given ratio of how much lye per how much oil to use. It's different for every oil. And so plugging it into a lye calculator or a any sort of soap calculator will help you make sure that, for one, you use enough lye that it will be soap, it will get you clean, but more importantly, that you don't use too much. So if there's too much lye in the recipe and not enough oil to bind with it, to saponify, I think is the verb, even though that sounds ridiculous, to bind with it, there will be extra lye left over, which will, again, burn you. Nobody wants that. So because each oil has a different saponification factor, very technical, it's really important to use some sort of calculator. You know, you can do the math yourself. If you are smarter than me and want to go down that road, great, but check your math too. I honestly probably would not feel comfortable making soap myself, or at least creating my own recipe without having some sort of soap calculator to help me out. The calculator that I use is called soapcalc.net, and it's great. You can choose your oil, you can choose your percentage of the oil, you can choose your batch size, you can choose your what they call super fat, which is how much extra oil do you want in your recipe, one, for conditioning, and two, as a buffer just in case some of your calculations are off. It's a safety thing to make sure that you have enough fat in your recipe to bind with the lye and you have no extra lye left over. That calculator will also tell you, hey, based on your recipe, it'll have this hardness, it'll have this cleansing ability, it will have this kind of lather. And so you can look at the recommended range and say, okay, I'm out of range here, I need to find an oil that will help me balance that. And that's how I landed on this recipe. I plugged in the oils that I have that are readily available, cheaper, and that have good qualities and land me in that range. I'll also post my recipe for soap down below if you guys want to use it as a starting block or want to just use that recipe too. Although I usually do a lot of DIY things myself, I don't usually put that out there as content. Part of that is because last year I had no time to do DIY things. But I am curious, for one, if you guys are interested in this sort of thing, if you want me to keep showing you, last time was candles, this time it's soap. I make my own lotion, I do all kinds of weird stuff. So I'm curious if you guys are interested in this, if you do want me to show you this, if you have certain things that you want to know how to do, chances are I know how to do it. I think the only really domestic skill that I don't particularly have is sewing. So as long as it's not sewing, I can probably tell you how to do it. But in all seriousness, I am interested in what you guys want to learn, so please feel free to leave that down below as a comment. Also, if you're looking for soap making supplies, including stuff like lye, I think Brambleberry is a great place to source those. That's where I get a lot of my soap making stuff. The mold that I'm using for this is from Brambleberry. That's where this lye is from. So I'll leave a link down to their soap making stuff down below if you want to check it out. All right, everything's ready. My oil is melted and warmed. The lye is pulled inside and cooled down. And so now back on with all of the safety gear. Gloves, glasses. And all I'm gonna do is pour this lye water solution into the oils. Take this immersion blender, turn it on, blend it all together really well until it hits something called trace. It's just when it starts to get a little bit thicker, and then at that point I'm gonna throw my fragrance oils in and blend it just a little bit more, and then I'm going to throw it into my soap mold. Pour it gently so it doesn't splash. So I think it just hit trace. It's a little bit thicker. Before it was pretty liquidy. It's dripping and there's a little bit more resistance when I blend it. So I'm gonna do my best to work quickly but still show you guys. So now I'm just gonna throw in my fragrance oil. And at this point it looks pretty much like vanilla pudding. So I'm gonna pour it, now that it's starting to thicken up, into this loaf mold. This is a 50-ounce loaf mold, so I based my recipe size off of this loaf mold size. Now be careful, just because this is now combined and in a loaf mold to become soap doesn't mean that it's safe to touch. It's still caustic. It takes 3 days to be safe, 72 hours for all of the lye to safely bind to all of the oils. So once I add a design to the top of this, after it gels up a little bit more and is conducive to holding a little bit more structure, I'm gonna set it aside for 3 days and basically forget about it, at which point I can pull it out of the mold and slice it up. Alright, it has been several days at this point and the soap has turned into soap. It did discolor to purple a little bit, but I knew that was going to happen. That was in the reviews of the fragrance oil that I used and I don't mind it. I think it looks gorgeous. So now it's time to take this out of the mold and cut it up into bars of soap. You can cut these bars as thin or as thick as you'd like, but the thinner that you cut them, the faster that they will cure and dry out. So I'm gonna set these aside for at least 4 to 6 weeks to dry out. They're still very, very soft at this point because they haven't cured yet. And my guess is as they cure, this color difference between the purple outside and the green inside will even out a little bit. So I'll set these aside in a place with decent air circulation and make sure that the bars aren't touching each other to dry for that amount of time. And that's all I've got for now. I'll see you next time.